With Trump's inauguration just 2 months away, well, his plan to carry out mass deportations, it's already facing some pushback. Now look, mayors and governors in sanctuary cities in different parts of the U.S., well, they're looking now to strengthen policies in their areas in order to protect illegal immigrants from being deported. But on the flip side of this, the other side, Tom Homan, Trump's new border czar, he's saying that he is willing to put these officials in jail. He's threatening them with federal crimes if they try to block him. Now, let me know your thoughts in the comments over the battle for sanctuary cities. Do you think sanctuary cities should be legal, illegal? Let me know. But look, as this happens, there's new data suggesting that crime from illegal immigrants is actually more serious than what we're even being shown, that the numbers are being understated. And this has to do with some of the areas the ways it's being collected and documented, which is just not happening in some regards. And meanwhile, Trump's big tariff plan, well, it's coming in. Trump has announced that he plans to put tariffs on Canada, Mexico, the Chinese Communist Party, notably over issues of fentanyl and drug trafficking. All three countries, in their own ways, are tied into the drug trafficking and money laundering, and also other crimes as well. Now, I'll be talking about these stories and more today, so let's dive into it. First of all, folks, with day one policies of mass deportations looming with the upcoming January 20th inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump coming up very soon, we're now seeing a different kind of wall being built. Mayors and governors are suggesting that they're going to strengthen sanctuary city policies to protect the illegal immigrants from being deported. And Trump's incoming border czar, Tom Homan, well, he says he's going to put these officials in jail if they try to do that. And the debate is now raising a broader question around public support, right? Do people actually want this? And also, what's the overall legality of sanctuary city policies? Should it be legal for officials to block the deportation of criminal aliens or illegal immigrants in general? Now, first of all, let's go back in time, folks. During the Obama administration, 2008 all the way up to 2016, what happened? Well, deportations were not nearly as controversial. It wasn't that big of a deal. President Barack Obama, a very strong Democrat, was labeled the deporter-in-chief by immigration groups. Obama deported more people than any president before him. But look, the immigration issue is different now because what happened after that? Well, the migrant caravans started towards the end of the Obama administration, leading into the early Trump administration. Mass migration became a global policy, notably only really heading into America, Western Europe, and Canada, right? And when, of course, the Trump campaign came in, well, what was Trump campaigning on? He was campaigning on the narrative of build the wall. That we have too many people coming in with these caravans, we need a wall to put a stop to it, and then we'll enforce our border policies. Policies on illegal immigration began to change, and governors and mayors in mainly Democrat areas, some are not, but mostly are, well, they formed new policies to protect illegal immigrants from being deported. These became the so-called sanctuary cities. That's how it all began. And in a recent interview with News Nation, the former acting ICE director, the guy who'd be in charge of deporting illegal immigrants under the Obama administration, this is John Sandweg, well, he questioned whether these policies are going too far, these sanctuary city policies. And he raised the point that mayors, well, they don't technically have the legal ability to block ICE from knocking on doors or the federal government from deporting illegal immigrants, but they do have some abilities, mostly only when it applies to preventing criminal aliens from being deported. The governors and mayors can, of course, block ICE's access to jails. They can make it more difficult for them to talk to law enforcement to deport an illegal immigrant who has committed a crime, which means they can only really protect criminals. And this raises some broader questions also about the real nature of these policies. Watch this.
the ones that were basically saying, look, if you're booked for driving without a license and we booked you because you didn't have a valid ID and we're trying to find out who you were. And the mayor says, I can't have you ICE taking them because it creates a chilling effect. Now victims are going to be scared to call when their immigrant spouse beats them up. Those are legitimate concerns. But I agree with you. Listen, some of these sanctuary policies went way too far, where you had convicted murderers where the locality would say he's a convicted murderer, but we're not going to give you to ICE, even though he's a foreign national. Obviously, those, undermine public safety.
Now, look, in terms of popularity, because we often view this as a very partisan issue, it does actually seem there's broad support for deportations on both sides of the aisle. This isn't just deportations of illegal immigrants who commit crimes. It's not just the criminal aliens. There's broad support, interestingly, of every illegal immigrant in the entire country. This is CNN, folks. CNN listed out some of these in a new poll, and it showed a CBS and YouGov report that had 62% of people saying they would support deportations of, quote, all undocumented immigrants currently living in the U.S. illegally. That, again, is 62% of a CBS poll, which would be left-leaning, saying that they would support deporting every single person who's here illegally. Now, other polls varied on that depending on the language, but some showed, mostly for the most part, did show pretty broad support for mass deportations, not even just some deportations, but mass deportations, and notably on the left side of politics, meaning that this issue is not as divisive as it's been framed. And regardless of this, many mayors are actually standing by their positions. A lot of them say that, look, say what you will, we need to protect the people in our states, the people in our cities, even if they happen to be here illegally. Mayor of Frederick, Maryland, Michael O'Connor, he announced in a press conference last week a new fund that he's going to be using taxpayer dollars to pay the legal fees of illegal immigrants when they challenge deportations. Watch this.
The Frederick Police Department, in particular, is committed to ensuring all residents feel safe in reporting crime and know that they will not be questioned about their immigration status. We refuse to aid and abet outside agencies attempting to detain, deport, or remove any residents from our community. To reinforce this commitment, I will be asking the City Council to support a legal advocacy fund in the upcoming fiscal year's budget. This fund will provide resources to community partners for Frederick residents who may be harmed by policies from the new administration, ensuring they have the legal support they need to stand strong and remain in this community they have chosen to call home.
Now, some mayors are making even stronger statements than that. The mayor of Denver, for example, he's been making some headlines. This is Mike Johnson. He spoke with Denverite about his policies and said that he would look into using the police in Denver, Colorado, to block mass deportations. Here's what he said. He said more than us having DPD stationed in the county line would keep them out. You would have 50,000 Denverites there. It's like the Tiananmen Square movement with the rose and the gun, right? You'd have every one of those highlighted moms, Highland moms who came out for the migrants, and you do not want to mess with them. Now, again, he's talking about using the Denver Police Department to block the federal government from carrying out mass deportations. Now, Mayor Johnson, he later walked those statements back, mainly because that would be legally questionable. He could potentially go to jail for that, as could everybody he mobilizes to do that. But he also made it clear his overall position has not changed, though. He said he'd be willing to go to jail, though, in standing against policies on mass migration. Watch this.
Trump's new border czar, Tom Homan, has said that he is willing to arrest leaders like yourself for standing in the way of these policies that they want to enact. Would you be willing to go to jail for these things?
Yeah, I'm not afraid of that. And I'm also not seeking that. I think the goal is we want to be able to negotiate with reasonable people how to solve hard problems.
You would encourage people to protest?
I think we're going to look at every option.
So, importantly, he says he's willing to challenge the policies of deportations, and he says he's willing to go to jail for it. And on that note, Trump's incoming border czar, Tom Homan, well, he says he plans to move forward with mass deportations with or without the support of local officials. and has also suggested local officials would be in violation of the law if they try to block these efforts. And Tom Homan also responded to the comments from the mayor of Denver in an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News. Watch this.
Me and the Denver mayor, we agree on one thing. He's willing to go to jail. I'm willing to put him in jail. Because there's a statute, it's Title 8 United States Code 1324 III, and what it says is, it's a felony if you knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. It's also a felony to impede a federal law enforcement officer. So if we don't want to help, that's fine. He can get the hell out of the way. But we're going to go do the job. President Trump has a mandate for American people. We got to secure this country. We got to save American lives.
Now, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, he also responded to this debate. In an interview with CBS News, he gave his take on where this could go. Watch this.
Now, I would say that the mayor of Denver, if he's going to resist federal law, which there's a long-standing history of the supremacy of federal law, if he's going to resist that, it will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And I would suspect that he would be removed from office. I don't know whether or not there'd be a criminal prosecution for someone resisting federal law, but he will lose. And people need to realize that what he is offering is a form of insurrection, where the states resist the federal government.
Now look, let's be honest with ourselves. A lot of states have been resisting the federal government in recent years. This is not technically a new thing. We saw this under Trump's first term with the blue states, right? They were standing up against Trump's policies. They were blocking his policies at the local level. And then we saw this with Biden and the red states. Again, Florida, Texas, they were also trying to block a lot of Biden's policies and standing up against Biden at the local level. But when it comes to state rights and the federal, government's rights, right? I think we can technically say that there's a limit to that. Yes, states can challenge the federal government, but it's not absolute. And we've seen examples of this also. One example, Arizona was sued by the federal government to tear down its border barriers. In Arizona, they had tried building their own border barrier because they said the federal government was delinquent on the responsibility of securing the border. Texas tried the same thing. The Biden administration sued them, and they, in the end, had to tear down the border barriers. In other words, there was a legal battle over state rights, but when they lost that battle, they had to go with federal law because states cannot violate federal law. That's the technicality here. And that's also the suggestion when it comes to states saying they will prevent the federal government from deporting individuals because that is federal law, and states technically do not have the ability to block the federal government from doing that. That's the technical battleground here. Now, as Senator Rand Paul states, though, if we do see illegal challenges, it is very likely this could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. It probably will go there. And as the incoming border czar, well, if nothing else, if it turns out to be true that local officials are violating federal law, then it could in fact lead to criminal charges against them. He is suggesting that he will enforce the law, including against local officials. And notably, the first wave of deportations they're talking about are not of just average people. The first wave of deportations, over 1 million of them, they're saying is going to be criminal aliens, illegal immigrants who have committed crimes in addition to illegally entering the country. And going by the law that Tom Homan has been citing, if you talk about normal, crimes of harboring or preventing the federal government from carrying out deportations, you could face up to 7 years in jail. But if the individual you're protecting from being deported or harboring or concealing or whatever else is also a criminal, it's a mandatory 3-year enhanced sentence on top of that. Meaning they could face up to 10 years in jail, but mandatory minimum 3 years. Now, Tom Homan is suggesting that he will even hold government officials to the full extent of that crime. We'll see if that actually happens, but this is where things are at right now. Now, look, another big part of the conversation on mass illegal immigration is crime. People talk about crime. If Donald Trump is going up and speaking about the problem of mass illegal immigration, what is he saying? Well, he's saying they're emptying out their prisons and they're emptying out their insane asylums. He says that they're sending their criminals here. He says the people are coming here, they're raping, they're murdering, they're joining gangs like Tren de Aragua. He's pointing to crime. And there are various allegations on how serious the problem of crime is with illegal immigrants. Other people would say, look, you criticize them of being criminals and so on. It's not as serious as you say. And a lot of it comes down to the numbers. Now, we do know of gangs like Tren de Aragua. We know of MS-13. These are illegal immigrant gangs mostly. Tren de Aragua being Venezuelans, MS-13 being mostly people from El Salvador. But there is data suggesting that crime from illegal immigrants is actually more serious than what the data shows. And here's why. The Daily Signal had an investigation on this. It said a review of the available data shows that criminal records of millions of migrants, the ones President-elect Donald Trump vows to prioritize for deportation, remain unknown due to illegal crossings, lax enforcement, and lax data collected by federal and sanctuary jurisdictions. In other words, if the first wave of deportations under the Trump administration is going to be known criminals, how do you deport them if the crimes are not being documented and if you don't even know who they are? That is the big challenge with mass illegal immigration. If you go by the books, under Biden alone, you're looking at about 10, 11 million people who have illegally entered the United States. If you look at the books based on numbers prior to that, it's about 10 to 11 million people in this country, meaning we're looking at 20, 22 million illegal immigrants. The issue with mass illegal immigration is you don't actually know all of them. Some numbers say the number could be much, much higher than that, maybe even tens of millions higher. And if you talk about the people who are not known, the gotaways they would call them, or the ones who are not being traced, we don't really know the full extent of illegal immigrant crime. Now back to Daily Signal. They say, in addition, an analysis of the available statistics by Real Clear Investigations suggests that the crime rate involving non-citizens is vastly understated. A separate RCI analysis based on estimates developed by the Justice Department's National Institute of Justice suggests that crime by illegal aliens who entered the U.S. by July 21st cost the country some $166.5 billion. They note the problem begins with incomplete initial vetting by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. The criminal histories of migrants from far-flung countries with often shoddy record-keeping are somewhat hard to determine, meaning they may screen some of them coming into the United States, but some of the countries that they're screening them from are not really developed countries in some instances. They're coming from every corner of the world, and some of these countries don't really have data on them. They also note it is also impractical to hold each person until he or she passes a rigorous background check, and as a result, ICE routinely releases many illegal immigrants into the country on their own recognizance, and then discovers afterwards that many had criminal records in their home countries. Meaning, ICE can only legally hold somebody for so long before they have to either release them into the heartland of the United States or send them back to Mexico to await things. The issue right now with the way the system works, when people illegally enter the United States coming in, let's say through Mexico, they have a vetting process if they go through the normal channels. This is not including the people who sneak across. If they go through the normal channels, they surrender themselves, ICE, Immigration Enforcement, or Border Patrol. They then take them to processing facilities. Department of Homeland Security is involved with that. They do a brief background check. They can only legally hold them for up to 72 hours. Anything beyond that, they have to let them go. They cannot legally hold them beyond that. And so if the record checks process takes longer than that, and remember they're processing tons, millions of people, if the record process takes longer than 72 hours, they have to let them go into the United States. And what happens? Well, sometimes the data comes back later. It says, oh, that's a criminal, that's a terrorist. And then what do they do then? Well, there's nothing they can do because the person is gone. Now, the other side of this is a lot of police departments, if they arrest an illegal immigrant, have no way of verifying the identity of the individual. And so unless it's a serious crime like murder, and they can hold the person indefinitely, they have no way to document the crime, they have no way to prosecute the crime, they have no way of holding the individual. The normal process set up in the way the country normally works is they hand those people off to ICE, ICE deports them. But because of sanctuary city policies, the governments, the mayors, the governors, they prevent that from happening. And because that process where ICE would be the law enforcement on that front, because that's gone, because of the way it's being handled, a lot of crime is not being prosecuted. And illegal immigrants are being let off without facing any criminal charges unless they decide to show up on a charge where they don't even have to verify their names. That's not happening, meaning we don't really know the full extent of crime from illegal immigrants. We don't know. And this is partly because of the barriers, again, that have been placed between law enforcement and ICE, as well as with other policies, the way the vetting is being done and such. But this will also very likely become a big part of the narrative battle that we're going to be soon watching unfold. Now look, in other news, folks, President-elect Donald Trump has announced his plans to put tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and the Chinese Communist Party in relation to drug trafficking. That's right, folks. Trump's going to tariff these different countries and put them in place. I'll be talking more about this after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. President-elect Donald Trump has announced tariffs. He's not even in yet, but he's announcing them. Tariffs on Mexico, tariffs on Canada, and tariffs on the Chinese Communist Party for their involvement in the drug trade and with other crimes as well. Now look, this is Donald Trump, what he's saying on Truth Social. He said, as everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico, composed of thousands of people, seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, Inauguration Day, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. Now he adds, this tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long-simmering problem, and he said, we hereby demand they use this power, and until such time that they do, it is time for them to pay a very big price. Now, Trump actually went further than this, and he noted his plans also against the Chinese Communist Party, and he wrote a whole post just on that. Here's what he said. He said, I had many talks with China about the massive amounts of drugs, in particular fentanyl, being sent into the United States, but to no avail. Representatives of China told me that they would institute their maximum penalty, that of death, for any drug dealer caught doing this. But unfortunately, they never followed through. That's normal practice for the CCP, by the way. They'll sign an agreement. They will violate it before the ink dries. They will always do that. But Trump continues, they never followed through, and drugs are pouring into our country, mostly through Mexico, at levels never seen before. He says, until such time as they stop, we'll be charging China an additional 10% tariff, above any additional tariffs. And he's talking about 60 to 100% tariffs on China in all regards anyways. This is an additional 10% on all of their many products coming into the United States of America. And he said, thank you for your attention to this matter. Now look, as you might expect, this is ruffling some feathers. This was the response from Canadian Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Watch this.
So last night, the Prime Minister had a conversation with President-elect Trump. It was an opportunity to highlight the fact that the economic relationship between Canada and the United States is balanced and mutually beneficial. The fact is, we need them, and they also need us.
Now, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, she also issued some statements in response to Trump. And her approach with responding to Donald Trump was more in terms of threats. She made more threatening comments. And she suggested that Mexico would respond with retaliatory tariffs against the United States, that we'd have a trade war with Mexico. But she also warned this would lead to a tariff war, and both countries, the United States and Mexico, should avoid this. And she said also, one tariff will follow another and so on until we put our common businesses at risk. And then she also went on to suggest that America is to blame for the guns being sent to Mexico, which are used by the cartels and all the cartel violence. And then she also alleged that Americans are at fault for the drug trade because American citizens buy the drugs like fentanyl. And notably, that's become one of the big narratives in Mexican political circles when it comes to crime. They say that it's actually our fault that we're dying from fentanyl being imported from Mexico. Now look, that's like an argument from imagine a big corporation selling poison to people and then being like, well, it's your fault for buying it. Shouldn't have bought it. It's all your fault for making us sell it to you. That's the argument from Mexico. Now look, that being said, Canada and Mexico, they are in fact some of the top trading partners with the United States. But the United States has also, a lot of other options. If you look at our trade deficits with Mexico and Canada, we lose money. And of course, like Mexico, we import just short of about, I believe, like 300 billion a year. And they export to us well over 400 billion. And then they import just short of like 300 billion, meaning we have a pretty big trade deficit with them. We lose money in our deals with Mexico. The other side of it too is Mexico has a lot of trade deals with China, the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, they're also one of the biggest trade partners. Now, you could argue with both Canada and Mexico that yes, we import a lot from them. We get things like oil and plastics and stuff from Canada. But because of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, a lot of American businesses were shuttered in favor of Mexico and Canada. I know many Americans who lost their businesses when NAFTA was signed because the businesses went to Canada. If you go to Canada, you'll find headquarters of a lot of American companies because they go there for the trade benefits. We trade at a loss with many of these countries. We get bad trade deals with many of these countries. Trump did renegotiate NAFTA, but even then, we don't really need them. That's the reality with it. And so when it comes to the trade war and domestic manufacturing, and Trump talking about bringing domestic manufacturing back and everything else is going to be doing, we could watch this actually cause quite a lot of harm, frankly, to other countries, but actually significantly benefit the United States because America tends to lose out on most of its trade deals. We tend to lose on most of our trade deals. And a lot of them are not really necessary for us. We would be better off economically going through other countries oftentimes, or renegotiating them, or just looking at domestic manufacturing on most things, not everything. And especially when it comes to things like manufacturing jobs going to Mexico, especially when it comes to big corporations putting, offices in Canada to avoid American taxes or, benefiting from other trade agreements. Really, America could renegotiate a lot of these things and come out on top. The question is, would we want to damage the economies of these other countries to that extent? Now, the Chinese Communist Party has also responded to this, and they basically came out and said, don't underestimate us. The CCP is coming out in more of a threatening tone. China also, Trump's talking about getting rid of a lot of the trade benefits they've been using to undercut us, and he's talking about putting tariffs on them above and beyond any other country on earth that we have right now. Look, folks, America, after the end of World War II, with Japan, with Germany, we let them put 100% tariffs on our cars. And we did that to let them build their economies. America allows other countries to tariff our goods to a very large extent because, again, we want to help their economies at the cost of our economy. America has allowed this to happen. Now, the argument after World War II, taking, for example, Japan and Germany into account, where they put literally 100% tariffs on our cars, and we don't really tariff theirs, which is why you have so many Japanese and German cars in our market, right? The way this works is this. Other countries say, well, Germany and Japan have 100% tariffs, we'll do the same. And so many countries put huge tariffs on American goods. Many countries charge us a lot and then expect us to not tariff them at all. And that's the way the game has worked for the United States and a lot of these trade agreements. In addition to that, we've signed trade agreements which give preferential treatment to other countries at the expense of the United States. Take, for example, the most favored nation trading status that we gave to the Chinese Communist Party, which lets them sell to us at our loss in many regards. Now, when America comes in and renegotiates it, what does that mean? It means that all the trade deals we've been losing a lot of money on, frankly. A lot of trade deals that have destroyed American manufacturing, a lot of trade deals that have ruined American industry to the benefit of other countries and helping them build up their own economies, will now be rolled back. That's the conversation right now, which is why a lot of them are panicking. In Germany, for example, the again, leader of the country, Angela Merkel, she's saying that Trump probably is not going to have a mutually beneficial trade policy. And that's an opinion being echoed in many other countries as well. When it comes to Mexico, the Mexican government has been not as supportive of Trump as many other governments throughout Latin America. Trump's looking to Argentina with Javier Milei. He's looking to El Salvador. He's looking to countries that now have more policies in line with his policies. And it is possible we may just bypass Mexico and go to these other countries which can manufacture just as cheap without the additional costs we have with them. On the drug trade, it is also true. Canada this is the way the drug trade works. Drugs mostly come from the Chinese Communist Party. This is not just the synthetic drugs like fentanyl, it's also the precursors for drugs like methamphetamine and other things. The Chinese labs manufacture it, they ship the poisons here to Mexico. Mexico manufactures them, sends them up into the United States. And oftentimes Mexican gangs or criminal organizations, they handle all the trafficking. And so Mexico blames it on the U.S. for the trafficking, for the sale, and so on. But it's mostly Mexican gangs handling that, or other criminal gangs. Now, the way this works is this. Go back to Mao Zedong. The drug trade started as a policy under Mao Zedong, former head of the Chinese Communist Party. Drugs were meant as a form of war against the United States. If you want to read a book on this, read Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. It lays out the entire history. It's hard to find a print copy, but you can find PDFs online. Red Cocaine by Joseph Douglas. It was a form of war waged against the United States, originally using cocaine. They mainly operated this through Cuba. Cuba ran the networks using its intelligence sources, creating drug networks all throughout Latin America. And Mexico was a key part of all of that. Now, the cartels work very closely with the Chinese Communist Party. The cartels, again, they do the trafficking, but the precursors, the synthetic drugs, and even the money laundering is all handled by the Chinese mafia. The Chinese Communist Party, sometimes even directly because of the Chinese businesses. And then once they sell it in the United States, a lot of the money laundering is done through Canada, mainly through Canadian casinos on the Indian territories. That's the way the drug trade works. The CCP has public statements stating that this is a form of warfare. In fact, drug warfare is even listed publicly in their unrestricted warfare doctrine. This is a war being waged against the United States, and Canada, Mexico, and China, and actually a few other countries too, are all part of it. That is what's happening. Now, The issue is, of course, that they can stop this. The issue is, of course, maybe even America could have stopped it, but we've not done anything about it up until now. Now they're saying they're going to stop it. But look, folks, also speaking of Trump, in other news, as we mentioned yesterday, the various criminal charges against him, well, they've now been dropped. All of them. And Trump has now issued a statement on all these charges being dropped. Frankly, he's doing a victory lap. This is what Trump had to say. Donald Trump on X, he said, these cases, all the criminal cases dropped against him. He says, like all the other cases I've been forced to go through are empty and lawless and should never have been brought. Over $100 million of taxpayer dollars has been wasted in the Democrat Party's fight against their political opponent, me, Trump. And he says nothing like this has ever happened before in our country. He said they also use state prosecutors and district attorneys, such as Fani Willis and her lover, he says, Nathan Wade, who had absolutely zero experience in cases such as this, but was paid millions. Enough for them to take numerous trips and cruises around the globe. Letitia James, who inappropriately, unethically, and probably illegally campaigned on getting Trump in order to win political office, and Alvin Bragg himself never wanted to bring this case against me, but was forced to do so by the Justice Department and the Democrat Party. He says it was a political hijacking and a low point in the history of our country that such a thing could have happened, and yet I persevered against all odds and won, make America great again. Now again, that's Trump's interpretation of the criminal charges that were brought against him. That's his opinion, and he's doing a victory lap right now. That's his public statement on it. It's not quite clear whether some of the charges will be brought back, notably in New York. They've put just the sentencing on hold indefinitely. They may try to sentence him in the future. Some have suggested, even with special counsel Jack Smith, that the charges could be brought back in the future. And that brings the big question of whether Trump will pursue investigations into those charges and to see whether wrongdoing was carried out on behalf of collaboration maybe with the federal government or how that actually worked. Now look, in other news, with crime becoming a major problem in major cities in the U.S., we're also now seeing discussions on how to deal with all the crime. And New York Mayor Eric Adams has a very interesting suggestion. He has a new idea for a new approach, which is, quote, the involuntary removal of mentally ill people who are dangerous to themselves and dangerous to others. And what do you call that, folks? You call that insane asylums. Now, this is what Mayor Eric Adams had to say in an interview with CNN. Watch this.
We need to have stronger laws that allow what's called involuntary removal. People who are in danger to themselves and in danger to others, we need to be able to take the action to involuntarily move them off the streets.
Now look, this would be an interesting approach. It's not clear whether he wants to actually create insane asylums. Insane asylums used to serve that purpose. They've been shuttered. Now we don't have them anymore. Now they're like voluntary. And if you're insane, unless you commit a crime, there's not much they can do about it, right? But for New York, this would be an interesting approach, given that a lot of crime does come from people who in the past would have been deemed insane. They are criminal, mentally ill people, oftentimes. Come to New York, you'll see it yourself. And with the closing of insane asylums, there's not much cities can do about that these days, right? You can only do something if the person actually does commit a serious crime. And the issue with insanity is insanity can actually get you off the hook for serious crime, meaning it's a real problem. Now, there have been talks about bringing back insane asylums. Some are suggesting that maybe we need them. We've mostly seen that discussion on among Republicans saying we bring back the asylums. We haven't really seen this from Democrats. And so Eric Adams coming out saying this, although he's not mentioning insane asylums directly, is very interesting. Now, on that note, we have not yet seen any major policies proposed on this yet, but it is becoming part of the national discussion. Maybe we need to bring them back. Now, what do you think? Do you think we need to bring back insane asylums? What do you think about Trump doing his victory lap? Is he in the right by doing that? Is he wrong? Let me know in the comments. And folks, that said, hit the like button. Let's jump into the chat. Let's see here. First off, William T. You're saying foreign nationals fall within the purview of the federal government. International affairs is one of the several powers the states gave the federal government to manage. William T., that is actually completely accurate. And a very good point also. That was also one of the reasons why the federal government was created. If you go back in time, prior to the founding of the United States, when America was a confederacy, in the period after the American Revolution, leading up to the creation of the Declaration of, not the Declaration of Independence, to the signing of the Constitution and the creation of the federal government, there were arguments around whether America would be a confederacy or have a federal government basically managing the states. Federation or federalization is actually closer to like a Roman Empire type situation, or a Chinese empire type situation, where you have actually different countries and you have the kind of the king of the countries. Every individual state has a governor. Every individual state has a military and its state legislature and everything else, right? It's a country. They're countries. But there's also a broader country that manages those, right? Which is why you have local government with every single element that a country would have. The National Guard is the military of the states. They have their own police forces. They have their own Congress, which is a state legislature. They have everything, right? They're countries. Every American state is technically a country. But we are united under the United States by the federal government. And the federal government has a federal military, has a federal government, and manages, of course, with various degrees of separation of powers, the states. Now, why did they actually do that? If you go back to before we had the federal government, America briefly was a confederacy, where basically it was just different states that were technically countries, and those countries had a pseudo-agreement of aligning with each other. The immediate problem they had was foreign countries, mainly in Europe, were screwing them over on trade deals. They were taking advantage of them with tariffs and everything else like that, and they were taking advantage of these small countries which did not have the power to fight back. The American states were getting taken advantage of by other countries outside the United States. And what came up very quickly was having a United States would give us more power diplomatically, more power on trade negotiations, more power on the military front, where we could threaten and defend and say, hey, we're strong, you don't mess with us. That was the argument for federalization. And when the federal government was created, that was its main purpose. The purpose of the federal government, well, first off, was the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, defining not just the form of government we have, but the rights of the average citizen, right? The Bill of Rights was a very big thing, which they actually added as a kind of a second thought, because at the time they believed that it was just obvious, and why would you even need to put it in writing? Good thing they did, right? What happened was this, though. When they first created the federal government and began looking at the responsibilities of it, the main responsibilities of the federal government were foreign diplomacy, foreign trade to an extent, which included tariffs, right? Managing tariffs and imports to make sure there was balance. When we buy something from this country, they're not putting American industry out of business because they're undercutting it. The purpose of tariffs was to create a kind of balance with that, to ensure they're not destroying our economies with trade war, which you can destroy a country with trade war. That was part of it. The other side was creating a strong federal army which could defend against foreign threats and also work as a bulwark against foreign invasion. And the other big thing they did had, of course, diplomacy, diplomatic relations with other countries, and the securing of the borders. Come to current times, what has been the argument? If you look at Texas and Arizona, when they were trying to secure their own borders against mass illegal immigration, what happened? In Arizona, they built a border wall using shipping containers. In Texas, they also created a border wall using various means, including shipping containers, but also including, barbed wire, including barriers in the water, and things of that sort. What was the argument from the federal government? The federal government said it was illegal for the states to do that. And what was the basis of that? The argument that it was illegal from the Biden administration, right? This was the argument from the Biden administration. The argument that that was illegal was because the securing of the border is a federal matter, not a state matter. That was the actual legal argument. The states were arguing you are delinquent on that responsibility. You're not doing it. The argument from the federal government was we are doing it, and the technicality of that is that the migration we're seeing is facilitated, meaning that they do have border barriers and they do have these things, but they're using the amnesty system and they're using the parole system to facilitate mass migration, meaning it is technically, by legal definition, not illegal immigration. That's the loophole. And so when they say that, oh, we're securing the border, we have the most secure border we've ever had, that's the actual legal argument for that. It's technically not illegal immigration. They are facilitating it using, again, the amnesty program and the parole program. That's what's happening. Now, to William T's point, it is the issue, though, that they're going to run into in a lot of these states, that if they do try to block the federal government from carrying out deportations, border security, and foreign affairs, and yes, even the management of illegal aliens and criminal aliens, which is the technical legal term, people who are unidentified and unknown in the United States, yes, those people do fall under the purview of federal government, which is why ICE is there, because Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, they're the ones who manage that. And the normal process of handling that is the handoff between local government and federal government when they commit crimes, because, again, it is a federal matter, meaning the states don't actually have the legal ability to challenge it. Right? This is the reality of the situation. And to William T's point as well, the local government actually will almost without a doubt will not have the ability to challenge this in the end, because we already saw Texas and Arizona try to challenge the federal government on this front, and they lost. There's ironically legal precedent from states trying to secure their border and the federal government stopping them from doing it, right? Ironically. Robert Harris, you're saying public schools and health care are used by non-federal taxpayers. The more the state relies on federal funding, the more the tax dollars will be used for non-federal taxpayers. That is true. There's a lot of different issues when it comes to the way public services are managed and the availability of public services when it's not being used by the American citizenship, right? If you come here from a foreign country and you're an illegal immigrant and you have a kid with you, that kid goes to American public school, paid for by American taxpayers. Now, you might remember in New York City, this was a big issue because when they were bringing in busloads and busloads and busloads of illegal immigrants, I believe the number at some points was like 11,000 people. I think it was like a week. It was a lot of people. Now, they blamed that on Governor Abbott for busing them here. In reality, that was part of the program being run as part of this agreement they have with the Global Compact for Migration to facilitate mass migration. They're busing them in from foreign countries. They're flying them in through the CBP One app. This is facilitated. And so, yeah, part of it might have been Texas sending people to Martha's Vineyard and stuff. But most of it is just because that's how the system works. They were bringing them in, putting up at the Roosevelt Hotel and otherwise in Manhattan, giving them free hotel rooms and otherwise. And then what happened? Well, a lot of them had kids. What happened when the school year opened up and all those children suddenly had to go into classrooms that were already overcrowded? New York City, even prior to that, had overcrowding in classrooms. Look, when I was a kid, I went to schools and there's maybe, 10, 15 kids per class. I had some classes that were bigger than that and some that were smaller. The argument, when you start having more than like 30 kids to one teacher, which is the state that a lot of schools are in right now, even without mass illegal immigration, the argument you have is that the teacher doesn't have time to work with any one child. And so you have a lot of kids, if they can't keep up, they can't keep up with it, right? If the kids can't follow what the teacher is saying and they start falling behind, the teacher can't work with 30 kids. Like already 30 is too much. 30 is way too much. And so what happens is the teacher just becomes a lecturer basically. And in order to even manage that many kids, the teacher has to have standardized testing because they're not going to have time to go home every night and grade every paper from 30, maybe even more than that kids. They're not going to be able to do it. Now, that alone has created the problem of standardized testing, multiple choice questions, and the detachment of the teacher from the students. That alone is a big enough problem as it is. And you can blame it on whatever you want, whether it's overspending on schools because the Department of Education has a lot of bloat, and the public education system will spend way more money than a private school, which provides much better quality of education with smaller classes because there's less bloat. You could argue it on that, or you could argue it saying, well, no, you give them more money, then you can hire more teachers, and that means, or build more schools, and then you have smaller classes. Whichever side you want to agree with, go for it. But the problem you have is this. When you bring in 10,000 kids, let's put it on a low end, and those 10,000 kids have to go into 5 different school districts, and those 5 school districts suddenly have to deal with an additional 10, 20, 30 kids per class, what happens to the school? The school can't handle it. They wouldn't even have the seating, let alone the capability of the teachers to deal with the type of influx. New York City, when they dealt with this, when the schools reopened, they had to close the schools down. They had to do remote learning because the schools could not handle it. There were too many kids. Now, that brings up some argument. And then in addition to that, you have to create English as second language classes. And you're not just talking about Spanish. It's not like they just come from Mexico. They're coming from like southern Mexico, from like the Oaxaca region, and they speak like, native dialects. They speak languages they speak Aztec still in some of these areas. They're coming from Europe, Eastern Europe, like Ukraine and such. They're coming from China. They're coming from like parts of Africa. They're coming from all these different countries. They're coming from Haiti where they speak French. And so when the schools not only have this type of influx, but suddenly they have to create language programs for let's be like on the low end, like 10 languages. It's more than that, but let's just say 10 languages. What do you think is going to happen to the school system? This has really caused a lot of harm to the school system. And as Robert Harris has noted with the healthcare system, it's the same thing. Look, Americans, we don't get free healthcare, as we all know. You could argue whether free healthcare raises the cost of premiums or not. The irony of Obamacare is a lot of the people in the middle, they're the ones who lose out the most. The people in the high-end brackets, they can afford the health care. It's expensive, but they can afford it. The people in the low end, they get free health care. They're like fantastic. People in the middle, they end up paying like almost the cost of rent just to have health care. The costs on health care these days are crazy, and it mostly affects the people in the middle, which is, of course, having the effect of destroying the middle class, which is one of the big arguments, right? The problem is when you bring in illegal immigrants, or even if you don't bring them in, even if you have a homeless person who wants health care, they get free health care, with or without Obamacare. And a lot of that works because hospitals cannot turn people away. What happens? I've seen it myself. Some homeless people, they'll call 911, and they'll say, my stomach hurts, or I don't feel good. An ambulance goes and picks up the homeless person, they bring him to the hospital, and they keep him overnight. That homeless person gets a free meal, a bed, and a warm room for a night. And they do it night after night after night after night after night. How many of you know how much it costs to ride in an ambulance? You're talking like, what, $3,000, $5,000? depending on how far it is. How many of you know how much it costs to stay in a hospital overnight? What, $5,000, $10,000? Not to mention all the tests they give you, not to mention all that. That's one homeless person. And I know people who work as, emergency medical, people who work in this stuff. I know people who work in this industry. They deal with people like this who do it every single night. Every night. And the individual, because they're homeless, they can't pay it. And the hospital, because they can't turn them away, has to do it every single night. These individuals alone rack up crazy bills for the hospital. And that goes into the cost of medicine and cost of everything else, because that reflects back on our medical costs when we have to go to the hospital, and the hospital has to make up for its losses by increasing the charges on everybody else. Now that's just the homeless population problem, and a problem caused by like a few handfuls of people. You can have a few people who cause this damage on a very large scale. Now what happens when you bring in 10 million people and you're giving them all that type of health care? Well, then you're going to have a real problem. That's when you start having hospitals going out of business. I'm not saying that they're going in there and staying the night all the time, but a lot of these illegal immigrants are getting free health care, even without being given official free health care, because they're not on the books. They can go to the emergency rooms and get, all the health care they want, and there is no way at all you can charge them. They get free health care. That's how it works, because they use the same loophole that the homeless people use. That's even outside of like New York and California, just giving them health care, which affects the premiums, meaning we eat the costs when we pay for our health insurance, right? That basically puts it, what that does when they give them free health care, it takes the cost out from the hospitals and it puts it on every business that mandatory, because of Obamacare, has to buy health care for everybody, and on every American citizen who gets fined if they don't buy into it. That's why our premiums are so high, because we're eating the cost of all these people who've been given it. Now you could argue, well, they did that because they had to save the hospital, because the hospitals are going out of business. The hospitals are going out of business. And so you have to choose, right? Do you screw over the American citizen because of Obamacare, or do you let the hospitals go out of business? And a lot of these big states, they're saying, well, put the cost on the American citizen, and so we're eating the cost in premiums. That's how the system works. Now, normally what you'd have is these people would be deported, plain and simple. They don't go to public schools because they're illegal immigrants. They don't get free health care because they're illegal immigrants, and you find a way to charge them for it if they use our services. That would be a way that most countries would handle this. America, because let's be honest with ourselves, as bad of a rep we get, we're more open than probably any country on the face of the planet when it comes to migration. Even outside of illegal immigration, we are more open to immigration than most countries on earth, up until recently, because Europe and Canada have been allowing mass illegal immigration also. The normal way you handle that is you deport them. We have not done that. And so the American citizen has been eating this, whether it's in terms of our premiums, whether it's in terms of all the other things we pay into, whether it's in terms of our kids getting poorer education and having to deal with crime in schools and every other problem you start having, whether it's kids not having sports classes or after school activities, which keeps them out of crime. That's why they do a lot of it, like football and basketball. It keeps kids out of trouble, It takes all that energy they have and puts into something positive. We've lost that because we're trying to support all these people. Now, is it compassionate to our kids? Is it compassionate to the guy who can barely make rent every month and still has to pay into Obamacare? Is that compassionate? That's the argument with this, right? You tell me. Do you think it's right? Because, hey, well, what do you do with these illegal immigrants? Do you not give them health care? Do you not treat them? What do you do? How do you treat this, right? this is kind of the conundrum we've gotten ourselves into. That's the problem we've gotten ourselves into. Let's see here. Sarah Allers, you're saying, who gets to define insane? That's a big problem. Yeah, so back to the point of insane asylums, because I mentioned, it's the last segment, that Mayor Eric Adams in New York is suggesting the involuntary removal of mentally ill people. Now, it's not clear what he means by that. Where do you remove them to? You know, do you put them in jail? Do you load them up on a bus and drop them off in New Jersey? You know, which would be kind of funny. Which, by the way, I know police, sometimes they do stuff like that to each other. I know that happens, by the way. Right? What do you do? Well, you're probably not going to put them in jail, so I assume Adams is talking about bringing back insane asylums, because there's only so many ways you can involuntarily remove an insane person. There's only so many things you can do to them. Now, when it comes to insane asylums, there are some arguments for it, and there are arguments against it. Let me tell you both. The arguments for it are, well, look, you have people, the definition of what would get you institutionalized. You're a danger to yourself, and you're a danger to others. You are a dangerous individual, right? You might harm yourself, you might harm other people. Come to New York for a week, you're going to see plenty of those people. You'll see people yelling at the top of their lungs in the street, making death threats. There are people threatening people with knives and stuff. There's crazy homeless people. Interestingly, I think they disappeared, some of them. I've been seeing a lot less of them. I think they've been putting up in I personally believe they've been putting up in hotels or like facilities because, you know, the illegal immigrants are getting that, and New York has a right to housing, meaning they have to put them somewhere. So a lot of them have actually, over the last year and a half, just disappeared off the streets. Like the homeless people have been disappearing. Right? Another issue entirely. I don't fully know what they've done with them. But you do see these types of people. And this is also why a lot of times when you see serious crime take place, you see the headlines. This guy was arrested 5 times prior. He was threatening people the other day. He was threatening 5 people, and then finally he killed someone. The question is, do you arrest them before they kill that person? Do you arrest them before they carry out some horrendous crime? You know, in New York, you just had a stabbing spree. This just happened. In parts of New Jersey, you've had this recently as well. You know, you have people who have track records of being like that, and then they just lose it and just go on a stabbing spree or shooting spree or whatever the heck else they do. And if you look at some of these shooters, oftentimes they have people with these types of track records. They're crazy people. That's usually how it is, unfortunately. Now, traditionally, you would institutionalize them. You'd put them in a nice, warm, padded room with a nice white jacket that keeps their arms hugging themselves in an act of self-love. And they can sit there and have very deep conversations with themselves and those around them. That was the way they used to handle that, right? That was the old way to handle that. Now, the problem you have with insane asylums is there were a lot of human rights abuses. You had them using them for experimentations. You had pharmaceutical companies doing medical experiments on them. You had all kinds of stuff like that. And it created a window for abuse. They were doing all kinds of terrible things to them. Read about MK Ultra. I know people think it's conspiracy, but it's a real program. There are government documents on it. You know, read about that stuff, right? This stuff was real. And, you know, lobotomies and things like that. You know, they used to actually have some really big problems that came about because they were abusing these people. Now, when it comes to how you handle this, I mean, this is the problem we're in again. It's a conundrum. There are costs and benefits on both sides. Just like, well, do you let illegal immigrant kids go to public school? Well, what are you going to do? Not let them have an education? What do you do, right? What do you do? Do you not treat the illegal immigrant who just got stabbed or had an accident or had a heart attack? Do you let him die? Or do you let them get free health care on the backs of the American taxpayer? What do you do? Same thing with the the criminally insane. What do you do? There's a cost and there's a benefit. Which side do you choose? If you bring back asylums, you probably will have some abuse. That's the reality of it. And the other problem is, too, how do you define what's insane? Look at a lot of communist countries. Look at the Soviet Union. They would take dissidents and they'd put them in insane asylums. It was an easy way to arrest the unwanted. If you had a person coming out and criticizing the regime, they'd be like, well, obviously you're a danger to yourself and you're a danger to others because you're obviously acting with disregard for your own safety because you know we're going to come after you. And you're a danger to others because you might get others to act in line with you and we'll go after them too. That's the communist argument, right? And so they'd put them in the insane asylums. The Chinese Communist Party still does this. The Chinese Communist Party does this to religious believers. They arrest them and put them in insane asylums, and then they use the insane asylums as a kind of a way to give the authority to torture them. And they abuse them, and they subject them to all kinds of horrible tortures. That's the extreme of it, right? That it does open the door. It does open the door to also like political abuse. Now, as Sarah Allers is noting, that comes down to how you define insanity, right? What defines a person as insane? And do you believe a person who hears voices is insane? Joan of Arc heard voices. Was she insane? I don't know. You tell me. How do you define it, right? And so this is the problem we have. Again, I don't have the answer to this. I think this is more of like an opinion, right? Do you believe we should have this or not? It's an opinion. Heck, let me know, folks. Should we bring back the asylums or should we not? Does the cost outweigh the benefit? That's the real question, right? Ashley from California, you're saying, I'm tired of lies through technicalities and plays on words. Ashley from California, aren't we all? Aren't we all? Actually, I want to go into the whole DEI stuff because that's a lot of lies through words. Obviously, we need to get rid of racism. Well, how do you do that? Well, we want to get rid of racism by telling you why white people are evil. Sounds kind of racist to me. You know what I mean? You can use language to do a lot of things. Or, they redefine what a firearm is, for example, to regulate guns. We're going to regulate a magazine as a firearm or regulate a lower as a firearm to prevent you from buying a lower and building a gun. We're going to regulate a block of steel as a gun because it could potentially be made into a gun. They use the definition of a firearm to regulate other things. You see what I mean? There's ways you can use an alteration of language to change the interpretation of law. That is a big problem. We'll do one more question. It's getting a bit late. Arij 86, you're saying, I have compassion, but I did not sign up to pay for other people's care when I can barely afford my own care. Yeah, and that's the argument, and I personally agree with that. I don't think it's compassionate to force people to pay other people's bills. I don't think that's compassionate. I think personally that there's a difference between forcing someone to pay something and engaging in charity. And this is one of the biggest misinterpretations that is presented under the arguments of socialism. Oh, socialism is just making people share with each other. Now, is it sharing if you take something by force from a person, take a cut yourself, and then distribute part of it to something else? No, you call that robbery. You call that robbery. That's not sharing. And I think it is compassionate to care for others. I think it's compassionate to, of your own volition, maybe want to help another person. But when it's forced on you, that is no longer compassion. That is abusing one person to the benefit of another. That is a form of tyranny. That's a tyrannical act. That is engaging in what traditionally would be considered plunder. You are plundering the wealth of one individual and then taking a cut and then redistributing it. You're no different from a medieval bandit. You are no different from a criminal if you're doing that. And the argument against a lot of these things is it's just basically state plunder, the manipulation of the powers of justice to carry out acts of injustice. I don't think it's compassionate one bit. I think if doctors of their own volition want to offer free health care on their own time, do it. If you're a person who believes there should be free health care for illegal immigrants, then go and become a doctor and give them free health care. I encourage you. Join the Red Cross. Join Doctors Without Borders. Join an organization that is a charitable organization that provides health care if you want to give them health care. That is the charitable way to do it, donating your own time and not forcing others to do it by force. That's the difference between compassion and tyranny. I'll do one more question. Tim Brindley, you're saying, I don't hear enough about Chinese CCP police being here in the U.S. harassing the Chinese people who are seeking asylum from China. Yeah, they do it. They do it, but it's true. There's not enough reported on it. I've done extensive reporting on this, and I've seen very few media talk about the full extent of it. So when a person comes here from China, there's a couple ways they do it. Either one, they come here and they just stay. Two, they go through the amnesty process, which is if you're a persecuted dissident, you're a Muslim Uyghur, you're a Falun Gong practitioner, you're a house Christian, you might apply for asylum. Or if you're a political activist, you believe in democracy, you might apply for asylum because if you go back, they'll kill you. There are a lot of people who come here apply for asylum. A lot of Chinese people are on asylum. There's also people who go through the snakeheads, the Chinese mafia. They get smuggled here, then they become slaves. They have to work in Chinese restaurants, they have to work in the garment industry, they have to work in prostitution rings, they have to work in those kinds of things. They have to work for the triads, the Chinese mafia. Now, the issue is a lot of people end up living in Chinatowns. Chinese communities are insulated. Not all of them, but the reason Chinatowns exist is because of that. And historically, the reason Chinatowns are so unique is because of what you call the Tongs, T-O-N-G, Tong. Tong is like a fraternal organization, and in traditional Chinese society, basically the government did not stretch below, this is before communism, the government did not stretch below the county level. Below the county level, the form of government was basically guilds, family organizations, religious institutions, and things of that sort. When Chinese people immigrated, the Tongs facilitated the immigration, and the Tongs built the Chinatowns. This is why if you go to a lot of Chinatowns, you'll find all these different fraternal organizations. If you want to watch some old movies on this, you'll see that Chinatowns often have like different, watch the old Hong Kong Kung Fu movies. You'll have different associations and factions. They have like Kung Fu battles with each other. I love those movies, by the way. I grew up watching those movies. I love them. But sometimes the Tongs too are tied in with criminal organizations, with the Chinese mafia. A lot of them, the mafia, the gangs will operate beneath the Tongs. Not all of them, but a handful of them. What the Chinese Communist Party did to extend its reach into foreign countries, because the nature of Chinatowns exists in every country. You can go to France and visit the Chinatown. You can go to Korea and visit the Chinatown. You can go to probably Germany and visit the Chinatown. Go to San Francisco, visit the Chinatown. New York, Chinatown. Everywhere is a Chinatown. When the Chinese Communist Party wanted to extend its reach into foreign countries, what did it do? It made two different branches of its government. One is called the United Front Work Department. The other is called the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. Both of these work on creating a bulwark of the CCP on foreign soil, mainly within the Chinatowns. And what they did is this. They did what they call liaison work. The Chinese consulate sends a representative to the Tongs. They go to the Chinese fraternal organizations, the family associations, the business associations, and so on and so forth. right? They go to these associations and they offer them trade deals. They offer them business opportunities. They do different things to get them in their pockets. Effectively, what they do is they transform the Tong into an overseas Chinese government office. And the officials who run the Tong become like a provincial leader like you'd have back in China. They create Chinese provinces on foreign soil using the Tongs as the leadership. And under the Tongs, you then have, some of them claim to have like tens of thousands of members. I'm not exaggerating. Some Tongs will claim to have thousands or tens of thousands of members. Some claim membership in the hundreds of thousands, like if you go to Canada, for example. And then what happens? All those members and their families and their friends become managed under the CCP system. The United Front carries out those operations. The propaganda department of the Chinese Communist Party, they do the narratives. The Chinese military, under what they call the political, used to call the political war, the general political department. They changed the name, I can't remember what it is now. They do operations with this as well. So this is a military and government operation. Then they have a separate government office called the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office that maintains databases on all these people. They not only have databases on every single overseas Chinese, they have databases on second generation and even third generation. And so you could be like a quarter Chinese. Your grandma was Chinese and your mom, your parents are American citizens and your grandpa was an American citizen, your grandma's Chinese. You will be on their books because they track you under the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. They maintain databases. And then they also establish under the Tongs the secret police stations. This is why if you actually read the reports on what these secret police stations are, they're like Chinese restaurants. Like some of them are Chinese restaurants. Some of them are like community centers. Those are Tongs, or organizations run by the Tongs. And then they create policing operations to go after those people because they keep tabs on all of them. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of people who understand how the system works. I don't like it, but I've become one of the few overseas experts on this. I'd rather that not be the case. But I do hope that more people come to understand how the system works. Because what this makes, basically, is you have people who are American citizens who do not enjoy the freedom of the United States. You have people who are American citizens who can't practice their religion without being harassed on American soil. You have people who are American citizens whose families in China get threatened with prison or death if they speak out against the Chinese Communist Party. I know a lot of people like this, especially within the Falun Gong community. They're hugely persecuted by the CCP, even in the United States. Even in the United States, they are persecuted by the CCP. And there's really not a lot protecting them. The government here, I assume they don't really know what to do with this because they don't really understand the way it works. There are people who practice Falun Gong being persecuted in America and on a large scale. And it's insane how it works. I mean, and it's not just Falun Gong, too. The Muslim Uyghurs face the same thing. A lot of the Tibetans face the same thing. A lot of dissident groups, even like people from like Mongolia, they'll face the same thing, too. The CCP does this on American soil. On American soil, it persecutes people. And it's because of the way the system works. Anyways, folks, not to end on a grim note, tomorrow is Thanksgiving. And I will not be doing a show tomorrow because I'm going to be hanging out with my dad and my family. I hope you all also enjoy your Thanksgiving. Take a day off from the news. Enjoy some good turkey. I'll be back again Friday, so join me again on Friday. I just won't be here tomorrow. But that said, folks, please take care of yourselves. Happy Thanksgiving. And as always, please take care of yourselves. Stay informed and stay free. Thank you.